10 years ago, the United States was hosting the Winter Olympics at Salt Lake City. And United Airlines was filing for bankruptcy. And we lost a fabulous designer, Bill Blass. And one of the largest companies in the world was buying up a lot of media real estate to talk about something called infrastructure. And that was IBM. And I was honored actually to be on that team of researchers who were working on this problem of communicating about what had become the largest, or one of the largest problems that chief information officers were facing. They actually were not having a lot of problems with systems of measurement themselves and operationally making them work independent of each other. They had a tremendous problem, however, getting them to connect to each other. So I'm up here today for two reasons, really. One is to echo the cry of CMOs that making things connect right now is indeed on the short list of their largest problems that they face. And because the ARF believes that we can make a contribution to this conversation in terms of the work that we have done. But we do believe that the CMO and the CMO's team, whether that be the media agency or the advertising agency or the team within the brand and the researchers that help support that, are in that very same place of connecting things to each other. But I would go one step further, that today's CMO must connect at an incredible pace. And they are connecting things themselves that are brand new. They're connecting digital technology that is very distracting sometimes. It's very shiny. It can do a lot of amazing things, and it can be hard not to get caught up in what those applications sometimes can do. So actually maximizing the capabilities of that technology with what the brand should do within that technology and maximizing the ROI of the actions. The speakers who came before me were talking a lot about this idea of silo busting and connectivity. And I'm going to be showing some results from research that we did whose very purpose was to do just this and do that connectivity at the speed of continually recalibration as consumers talk back. One of the things that we've been hearing a lot about and frankly running up against as we're brand strategists is not only the rate of change impacting our clients, but impacting us as well in terms of how long strategies actually last. What is the shelf life now of a brand strategy in this marketplace? As a brand is out there doing something like web listening, and consumers are interacting constantly, those strategies have to also be extremely flexible. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, that intersection point of strategy and the digital world, understanding how consumers are actually engaging with digital platforms in your category, whatever that category is, and how they're engaging with the category itself and bringing those things together. We call it the digital platform GPS, using that analogy to find direction of what to do. We did this transformative research. I say transformative, that was the label given to it by the 4As as they asked us to talk about it, and the ARF as they asked us to talk about it. We did a very large study, 49,000 consumer interviews drawn from the 9 US Census regions. We looked at 83 categories, 598 brands, and 14 digital platforms. This is easier without my glasses, I like it. Male, female, 18 to 65 years old. And they self-classified for category and digital involvement. We named those at the deep end of the technology pool Higitals, meaning high usage, digital usage. We like the name, so we're sticking with it until someone comes up with something better. But we really wanted to see what happened when we looked at those engaging very strongly with digital platforms in those categories versus the general population, just to see if anything would be there, because we've never done this before. We had never actually taken all of the category engagement work that we've done for many years and tried to find this intersection point. And so we looked at these Higitals. I'm going to show you two very short stories, because I only have 15 minutes, 8 minutes, 56 seconds, to tell you about what we found, but it's literally just a small bit of the stories that we have to tell about it. The Higitals were the top 20% digital involvement in the category, and that changed by what categories we were looking at. No surprise to anybody in this room, likely. And they called it, not us. We didn't say, this is the high end, this is the low end. They told us how they spent their time in terms of engagement on those platforms and the usage, and how it connected to the emotional and rational drivers in the category is what we do in terms of our methodology. And we wanted to see if they indeed did have the different worldview everybody was talking about. That was really important for us to understand. The 14 digital communication platforms we looked at, they needed to have just one criteria. A brand had to be able to connect on them. And we looked at all of the studies out there that were actually tracking sheerly usage in terms of time spent. And we came up with 14 categories of that. We don't have time to go through the methodology today. Dr. Robert Pasakoff, who invented the methodology, is here and actually has some books for anyone who is interested on showing some case studies that we've done on media work. But let me just say quickly that it is based on the work of Carl Jung, because the emotional component has always been a part of the way that we've looked at the world at Brand Keys. And those things are fused with the category attributes, benefits, and values. And it's just important that you see how this works, because I'm going to be showing you some bar charts and understanding where they come from. They go through a factor regression and causal path modeling that I know truly nothing about. I just really understand what happens at the end. And I'm the storyteller, so I go out and chat with the brands about what this actually means. And so you're going to see, as I take you through this, some category drivers. And what we did was we wanted to understand, looking at those category drivers that we've worked with for so long, to understand how engagement with that category actually intersected with engagement with those platforms. And so let me show you some of the results. And again, would love to talk to you more about them one-on-one. We have a lot of stuff like this. Like this is, in the category, for example, here of OTC pain reliever. We know that these 5 digital communication platforms equal about 75% of the engagement going on in this particular category. That's great. It's probably something that they might already have known historically, because they are, tracking usage, right? It's not transformative data, but we have a lot of it so that we understand what happened across all of that stuff that we measured. But what we were interested in really, again, was what happens when you connect strategy and digital. And so let's look at the packaged coffee category. Here's those drivers again. Well, the first thing we saw in this particular category was an example of where the category looked the same in terms of the order of importance of those drivers. So from left to right, from more important to least important, not unimportant, but just lesser in importance. We saw that the category operated the same way, this very established category, whether you were looking at someone who was at the high end, a Higital, or you were looking at the general pop. The only difference was higher expectation. That's the height of those bars, indicate the level of expectation for that particular driver. By the way, have not yet to see a category as I've looked across all this data, where this is not true, that those who are engaged, those Higitals, more digitally engaged, have higher expectations. Another no surprise, right, to anybody, but it is nice to see that it does bear that out. And so we see that over and over again. So in this category, we saw that that was happening, that they looked at it the same. And inside those drivers, these are the attributes, benefits, and values that make those things up and give them their name. Again, no time to chat about how we got there, but we'd love to talk to you about it. So the brand assumption is, because that first driver, right, is taste and aroma. We saw that that was the most important driver in the category, and it had high expectations, right? Is the most important driver of engagement with consumers in my category. So if this is my category, I should be using Facebook to talk about taste and aroma, right? I mean, because that's the most important thing that consumers care about. But let's see that when we look at that intersection point, actually, what we see intersect with that driver, social networks actually intersects with that second driver, which is brand values. And inside of that driver, which gives it its name, are things like value and respect and a tried and true brand and availability and buys and sells, free trade. And so basically what the consumers in this category want to see reflected in that space is both a social capital, if you will, as well as a financial capital, being the subject of the day. Actually, the reality is that in the social network space is where that kind of conversation belongs. And I talked about the continuous recalibration as categories change. One of the things we hear a lot from brands is this idea of, web listening and all this stuff that's going on and all these tools that are out there to really understand how things are changing. And so in this category, for example, one might find that there's a new element in that category, something like nutritional supplements, for example, that was not brought in before. And the brand comes to us and says, where does this fit in? How important is this? Is this a small but vocal group, or is this really some trend? And so when we look at this, we see that indeed it's actually showing up in the last driver. And it's in that driver, it's actually the brand's own website that intersects there. And so what we can do is then say, well, right now it's not at that top level of importance, but if you want to address it and talk about it, that actually on your website is the place where the engagement meets that particular driver. One of the most fascinating stories that I saw was this one in the tablet category. This is where, when we looked at the Higitals and the general population, they really looked at the category extremely differently. They were looking at brand values, which is the third driver for Higitals, and the first driver for general pop, very, very differently. When we looked at the general population in this still nascent category, they were looking for the brand shall lead. They weren't nearly as confident as the Higital population, which put brand values third, and actually advanced design and features came before that. And you can see when you open up those drivers that those things are actually supported by what's inside of them and the percent contribution that those particular items make. And so you see it's all about customer service and warranty with the general population. They're not so sure about this thing that they're buying, where innovation is what's driving that decision when it comes to Higitals. But that's just the category. Right, so you know this about these two audiences. What about what's going on in terms of media? And we see that when we look at what's connecting with those drivers, we see that and that brand values driver for the general population, that it's really paid media. It's those browsing portals and classified and search that's showing up, with blogs showing up last. When we look at Higitals, what we see is that an earned media is what's creating the bulk of that engagement in terms of that driver. Things like blogs and digital newspapers, they want to see the brand being written up, and they want to understand that that brand is respected in that space. And so just to close, when we think about transformation, we think about this kind of work and the work that needs to be done in our view of actually connecting strategy with the digital platform engagement that's happening out there, no matter what that is. And I probably am not going to get asked this question, but I'm going to volunteer an answer anyway. If I had a magic wand to wave, I would say that begin really with what the CMO is struggling with and all the teams that ladder up to that CMO. And connectivity, believe me, is on that short list. Thank you very much.